Hi, I'm Marie from wisdompreserved.life, and today I am showing you how to make rustic display boxes with storage. Now, unfortunately, all I have is a finished product photo for you, not a little video, because the finished product ended up going up to fair so quickly, but I was able to get the pictures with the exhibits on it. This project began when we were renovating one of our old barns that was for our flower displays. And the old displays had really old burlap that was around the edges. It had fake grass that was on the top. And as we pulled that off, considering maybe replacing it with something else, we found that there was some really good wood underneath it all. But that good wood was actually covered by plywood and other boards that they had put on there to try and shore it up. These display boxes were probably like 50 years old at least. So my first project was just to try and take it all apart and see what we could reuse. When it comes to a county fair, they don't have a lot of funds to just, buy new stuff. And honestly, I really like the way reclaimed wood looks, especially the really old stuff. And so I thought if we could take this apart and utilize those pieces, that would be ideal. So that's the very first step for me, was pulling apart all this wood and trying to figure out what I could make out of it. The only thing that we added to it besides the items from the display itself was some corrugated metal from an old roof that we had taken down at the fair. When I pulled off the plywood, I actually found like this amazing shiplap underneath it, and I couldn't believe how good of condition it was in because it had been covered for so long. Now, there were a fair number of nails in it, and there was some paint on the top of it, but the bottom side didn't have any at all. So I just was able to flip it and make that painted side the bottom of the top, so you didn't even see it, and you just saw this beautiful reclaimed wood. When you're dealing with reclaimed wood, you also have to deal with whatever the person before you has done. Now, in this case, the people who had built the initial display had taken and used really long nails and bent over every single one that they put through. So I had to bend the tip of the nail back straight and then get it out the other side. So it was kind of a pain in the butt, but I mean, so worth it for how this ended up in the long run. An additional issue with reclaimed wood is just how dry it can be. Because of that, there tends to be a little bit more cracking, but I mean, don't throw it out just because you've got a crack in a board. You can actually glue it and have a really strong bond and be able to reuse this wood still. Now, the way that I usually do it is I use the wood glue and then I use the clamp, and just make sure that you have a washcloth close by so that you can wipe off any excess glue, because it won't take any of the stain. I absolutely love using reclaimed wood just because of the patina that it has. It's a little bit different. You could do new wood for this project. It's a little bit easier. There's not as much prep work, because when you use reclaimed wood, you're not only going to have to do repairs and pull nails out and, possibly glue it, but you're going to have to sand it down. And when I sand it down, I don't sand it all the way through that old patina. I just get any rough marks off it, anything that could turn into splinters or, cause little breaks in the wood, kind of around the edges. But make sure that you keep that character to the wood, because that's the whole reason you're using reclaimed wood in the first place. After your boards are all prepared, it's time to go ahead and cut them. I'll provide a cut list at the end of this video so that you have that. It's also on our website at wisdompreserved.life. Using the 2x6s, I went ahead and built the corners. This worked best when I rested the top board on two separate 2x6s, but I only actually attached it to one of them. It just provided the support it needed so that I could use the nailing gun. Now, I used 2.5-inch nails to connect this together, but you could use screws if you wanted to. When connecting the 2x6s, I connected them along the long side, creating an L shape for the corner. I used a speed square to help me line up those corners nicely so that they weren't tilted funny when I put them together. Having them on a nice flat surface also helps too. When I made this first box, I went ahead and connected the 2x4s at the top and the bottom of one side, and then at the top and the bottom of the other side, and then I connected them all together. But for later versions of it, I actually ended up making a little square out of 2x4s. I did two of them, one for the top, one for the bottom, and then I stood the corners up on their ends and connected it in. And that worked a little bit better, I thought, but you could do it this way too, the way that I show in the video. So that's kind of up to you. And this just builds the base for your box. It's great. It makes it really easy to go ahead and put the floor in later for the bottom of your box. And I mean, it's been so great for us to have for storage. Like after the fair got over, we were able to put all kinds of storage inside these things, and we have them on casters, so it makes it so that we can move them around really well. Now that your base box is created, it's time to put the corrugated metal on the sides. Now for this, it's going to take about 1.5 sheets for each side. So it's really best to do the half sheet and then put the whole sheet over the top of it so that you have, any of your cut sides are kind of hidden. I installed these with 1/2-inch screws. Probably the hardest part of this is getting that metal cut. You can use nippers to do it, but that can be really difficult. There are some nipper tools that you can attach to a drill that make it a little bit better. You can also use a circular saw and put the saw on backwards and cut with metal, but again, that can be kind of difficult. Probably my favorite thing that we did is used a metal cutting disc, and you can see my husband doing it here. It works just fabulously for cutting through this. One of the sides of the corrugated metal was more weathered than the other, and I really wanted that one to be the one that showed. You want to get it nice and cleaned, but you still want to have that feel of age and rusticness to it. With the corrugated metal installed, now it's time to put the trim over the top and the bottom, and that just kind of cleans it up a little bit and gives it a much more finished look. I used 2.5-inch screws to do this. It will really pull it down and help with any inconsistencies with that corrugated metal, especially if you're using older corrugated metal like I was. I don't like to cut the trim pieces to the exact size that I want until I'm actually at that point, especially with reclaimed wood. Some of it will be torqued, and anytime you're doing trim, you want it to be really tight. You don't want to have any gaps there. So what I tend to do is cut it close to the size that I need and then trim it down as needed when I'm actually to the point of putting it on. I really liked using the wood clamps to hold that top trim piece in the right spot because I wanted it nice and flush on the top there. And then I was able to screw it in really easily. To complete the bottom portion, all we need to do is add the floor, which I was able to take this was the old top for the display, and just put it into the bottom. You notice that it takes a little bit of wiggling to get it in there. I found with the additional ones that I made, because we ended up doing 8 of them for fair, that it was much easier to put them in before I had put the corrugated metal on. So really, I would recommend doing it in that order as opposed to the way that I did it on the videos here. With the bottom complete, it's time to build the top of the box. So the first step for that is cutting the shiplap to length. For these boxes, I did a 4-foot top because it just seemed like it would work the best for what we had going on previously. Before, ours had been about 4 feet by 6 feet, and I felt like we needed a little more space for people to walk around them and that it would be a little more manageable. Now, the edge of the shiplap will need to be trimmed on the ones that are on the very edges, and then you just have to line them up on the ground. I used a clamp so that it would hold the shiplap portion together, and figure out which one you need to rip in half, because there's going to be one of the sides that you need to rip down in order to get it to the correct width. that you're going to need, in addition to cutting the boards the proper length. Using a flat surface is going to be really important for this because you'll place them down with the top on the bottom, and then you have to make a little lip for on the inside so that the top doesn't shift around while it's on the box, like if someone was to bump into it. And it needs to be a very tight fit, because if it's not a tight fit, then again, you're gonna have the top shifting. I really recommend marking the lid for which side goes where, because one side of the box is slightly wider than the other side of the box. I put like a little red arrow on the top of the box and on the top of the lid pointing towards each other, so that when you're going to put the lid back on, you know which way it really fits best. Then the last step for making the lid is just adding a little trim board around all of the edges. Now I put it on with finishing nails, but later on I came back and I used finishing screws to hold it on, because it did shift a little more than I would like, just since that's the area that you grab when you manipulate the lid itself. After creating the lid, we went ahead and put it on top of our box, and then this is when you kind of fine tune it with your sander. So you go back and you check between the shiplap, are there any areas that stick up? Is there any spot that looks like maybe you needed to sand it down a little bit more so that there's no splinters or no really weathered areas? As well as rounding off the edges themselves so that they're not quite so sharp. The big thing really is just getting those transitions so that they go nice and smooth between the one area and the next. And then after you're done doing the sanding, you wash it off to get all of your dust off and go ahead and finish the top. So for me, what I did was the brown finishing wax. I really like this stuff. It's just amazing because it's slightly water repellent, which is great because we have flowers on this. And it works really well for scratches. If there's any scratches that get on it, you just put another coat on it later, which I'm sure, before future fairs, this is going to be necessary, and it evens it out perfectly. You don't have to remove the entire finish. And anyways, just one of my favorites. So I use the Jolie's finishing wax, and that worked well for me. And you have to do the boards for that too. I did find on the additional ones that I did that it was easier to do that finishing wax on the bottom portion before you put the corrugated metal on. And this is just another example of, if you make enough things, you learn what works better. So hopefully you guys can learn from my experience as opposed to having to do it the harder way first, the way that I did. This ended up being just a fabulous piece for using at the fair. There were so many people actually who came up and were desiring to have something like this at their house. In fact, I had a couple people ask if I did any commission work, but I just had to tell them that, this is really not what I do. What I'm doing and what we're doing in Wisdom Preserved is we are trying to preserve the wisdom of the lost arts, and we really want people to learn how to work with their hands, how to be self-sufficient, how to do things on their own and not have to rely on other people all the time. And I just love it when we can do a project like this where we're recycling and making something better, and especially when we're contributing to something like a local county fair that is so good for our community. So thank you so much for watching, and I would love it if you would like and subscribe. And here is the cut list for you.